Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hello and welcome back to Oxford from the Inside. I am your host, Junaid. I am a medicine student at Trinity College going into my third year, and I'm here today with another medicine student at Trinity College going into her third year, Tiri Hughes. Tiri, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, yeah, as Junaid said, I'm Tiri and I'm going into third year doing medicine at Trinity. And aside from doing my actual degree, I also spend a lot of time representing disabled students within the university. So I'm actually the disabilities officer for Trinity, just helping out around the college. But on a wider cross-university spectrum, I am the chair of Oxford SU Disabilities Campaign, which we abbreviate to DisCam, so that's what I'm going to call it. And DisCam is basically a campaign of students. It's an entirely student-run committee, but it's part of the SU, so we have a lot of support from staff within the SU. And half of what we do is campaigning, basically for changes within the university and sometimes within Oxford City as well. And the other half is doing socials and events for disabled students, as well as raising awareness. So that's pretty much what I do. And I'm just here to chat a bit about being a disabled student at Oxford and how to try and navigate around some of the additional problems that there are.
Yeah, exactly. And you've just heard, of course, the many things that Tiri does. And just judging by that introduction, you can tell Tiri has a very busy life at Oxford next to all the medicine that she does. And being at Oxford, if you do the same subject at the same college in the same year, if you're one of those few people, then you end up spending most of your time together. And that very much is the case for Tiri and myself. We've seen a lot of each other in the last 2 years. For better or for worse, one might say. We're a lot more like family, I think, at this point. Would you agree, Tiri?
I would. And yeah, we're sharing a flat next year, so.
All the more reason, yeah. So there's that. Hopefully that chemistry will shine through today. And I will say, just before we get into talking about the episode, if you are interested in what Tiri's daily life studying medicine is like, and also you want to see some quality Tiri Junaid interactions, then you can watch Tiri's week in the life vlog video she made in first year for Oxvlog, which will be linked in the description. So do check that out if you're interested. But for today, as Tiri said, we will be talking about what it's like to be a disabled student at Oxford University. So as is the nature of this episode, that's going to sort of underpin all of the other episodes we do on the show, talking about what it's like to be a student studying a subject or what it's like to apply and choose a college. All of that stuff will be different for students with disabilities in different ways according to their individual conditions. So as is the nature of this episode, we're going to be talking about all sorts of stuff from application to what it's like at Oxford. There'll be a lot of stuff to get through, but I will assure you that we have, in my opinion, the most qualified student at Oxford University to talk about this stuff. As you've just heard, Tiri is the chair of Disabled Students Campaign, but also has been doing all sorts to advocate for accessibility and disabled students prior to coming to Oxford and at Oxford, including speaking at Parliament multiple occasions. So honestly, guys, not to brag on the behalf of Oxford from the Inside, but you couldn't get a better interview than this. Not gonna lie, just gonna put that claim out there. And of course, as always, Oxford from the Inside will giving you the good, the bad, but always the truth. And I think we should get right into the episode. I don't want to take any more time away. So Tiri, the Oxford students' sort of journey doesn't begin the first time they step foot in Oxford. Of course, it starts when you ask the question of, okay, is Oxford right for me? What is it going to be like studying there? So for a disabled student thinking of going to Oxford, what are the sort of questions they ask or could ask, or what sort of hurdles are there at that very initial stage?
So one of the really big things that's different about Oxford and also applies to Cambridge and a couple of other universities is the collegiate system that we have, where as well as being part of the wider university, you're in a smaller college that has lots of people doing lots of different subjects. And I really love the collegiate system. It means that there's, I think, a greater sense of community because you're grouped with a smaller group of people and it's not just people doing your subject. But that system does throw up some accessibility issues that don't apply at other universities. And that does mean that a lot of the accessibility information that's available online for applying to university actually doesn't apply to applying to Oxford or Cambridge or somewhere like that, because they haven't considered the collegiate system. They'll talk about applying to accommodation, but not that you can only apply to accommodation within your college or you have to go private. It's a very different system. And similarly, just because most students who apply aren't disabled, a lot of the collegiate advice about how to pick your college doesn't consider disability. So you're kind of stuck with two bits of advice, neither of which perfectly fit your scenario. And you have to mix them together and kind of hope for the best. So I'm hoping I can try and shine a light on some of the important questions you should ask. So colleges are generally quite old in Oxford. Some of them are newer, some of them are, even in the last couple of 100 years. But Trinity, where Junaid and I go, was built in 1555.
Yep.
And there are some colleges even older than that. And as most disabled people will know, the older a building is, the least accessible it's going to be, as a general rule. There's been laws brought about in more recent years about making sure new buildings are made accessible, whereas there isn't a law saying that you have to make an old building accessible.
Right, okay, yeah.
And you can understand that sometimes, because if you've got a lovely old building and you're trying to preserve it, it's quite difficult to make it accessible. But equally, that does mean that there is a difference between the level of accessibility different colleges are able to provide, which doesn't apply to non-disabled students when they're thinking about applying to Oxford. So, in my opinion, it's more important for a disabled student to really think about what college they're applying to, because we always say when we're talking about access stuff, aside from disability, really doesn't matter what college you end up at, and you end up loving your college anyway, which is pretty much always true. But if you end up somewhere that's just not accessible for you, that can be much more of a problem. So there's lots of ways you can find out if a college is accessible. Most colleges have information on their separate websites, which you can just Google the name of the college in Oxford and you'll find their website. It really depends college to college how easy it is to find that accessibility information. And some of it is more thorough than others. So you'll find some colleges will just tell you how many disabled toilets they have and which rooms are step-free access, whereas others will have more detailed information like hearing loops and that kind of thing. You can definitely get in touch with colleges. They should have a disability contact listed somewhere on their website, a member of staff who can answer more specific questions and also just, would know who to direct you to. There are some general accessibility guides for the university, which I'll put some links to useful things. I'll send them to Junaid and he can put them in there.
It will be in the YouTube description. So yeah,
a great list of resources.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of general collection of accessibility information for Oxford colleges, faculties, libraries, all the buildings. And that's being updated literally as we speak. Somebody is going around and doing accessibility audits on all of the colleges, and I think will eventually progress to all of the departments. So yeah, it's very much a new work in progress getting this level of detail. If you're thinking about applying this year or maybe even next year, the accessibility information is not going to be complete yet. So you will have to do a little bit more digging and email colleges, phone colleges, and try and get that information. For Trinity, have produced some accessibility information, which is on the Trinity website. And I know some disabled students' officers at other colleges have done the same, but obviously we're also full-time students, so we can't do everything. And there is a bit of inequality between colleges in terms of how much information is actually available. So normally I would say the best thing to do is to go and visit, but unfortunately it's
not the most possible thing at the moment. No.
Yeah. So, the substitutes would probably be to be emailing staff within the college and just finding out as much information as possible and just detailing, these are my needs, this is what I would need if I were to come to your college and I'm thinking about applying. And I think most disabled people are quite used to having to think about stuff in advance and plan things a bit more carefully. So this is just kind of another one of those things. So the questions that you should be asking obviously are going to depend on your needs. And as disabled future students, you're probably going to know more about those than anyone else. When I first started, I said, I need somewhere for my guide dog to go to the toilet. That's important. Preferably somewhere enclosed so that gardeners don't get cross with me.
They do love their gardens in Oxford.
They do love their
there's
gardens.
that. Yeah.
And to be fair, they are very pretty gardens.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
Gorgeous gardens in Oxford. So I think it's quite right that my guide dog does not wee on the flowers. I needed somewhere that was level access for my accommodation and as much level access to the important places like hall where we eat and libraries as possible. And another important thing for me was the physical location of the college, because I can't cycle, which a lot of people do in Oxford, especially if they live in the further out colleges. And I can't walk quite as far as most people. So if I'd been at a college right on the edge of Oxford that was miles away from the medical faculty, I would have struggled a lot more. And I probably would have had to have taken taxis everywhere while all my friends were walking. And it just wasn't really the experience I wanted going to university. So I applied actually to St John's, and lots of people apply to a different college than the one they end up at.
Yes.
It's a common thing that happens, and for most people it's not a problem, and for me it wasn't a problem. I was very lucky. Trinity is next door to St John's and has a pretty similar level of accessibility within the college, so all of my needs that I'd identified as being met by St John's were also met by Trinity. There are a number of colleges that if I had been pulled to, I would have quite seriously thought about rejecting my Oxford offer and going somewhere else, because I wanted that kind of experience of chatting with friends. And, you know, Junaid and I chat the whole way to lectures, and if I've been in a taxi while everyone else walks,
of course, it would just not be the same. Yeah.
And there's not a very clear system for what to do if you get pulled to a college that's inaccessible to you. It doesn't happen enormously often because, you know, disabled students applying is a smaller subgroup, and then of those, ones that get pulled is another smaller subgroup, and of those, ones that get pulled somewhere that's inaccessible is smaller again. But I think it is significant enough to consider, and I would like to see a proper clear system come about where disabled students can say, look, I totally accept that college doesn't want me, but I can only go to these 5 or 6 colleges. And lots of students every year get an open offer and they only find out where they're going on results day. So I do think there is leniency in the system enough that we could develop that. But that's my kind of dream for the future. That's the campaign. That's the campaign,
Yeah, there it is.
But yeah, as it currently stands, I think the best thing to do is if you do end up in that situation, you just get in contact with college as soon as possible, the college you've been assigned to, and also with the Disability Advisory Service, and just raise your concerns. Because the understanding is if you get pulled to a college that's inaccessible to you, they will make themselves accessible. But if you only find out that you're definitely going there in August, and that's, you know, when results day is, and you're meant to be starting in October, there's only so much practically that can be changed in terms of, you know, massive structural changes. And
which they do have to be because of how old the buildings are.
You know, some things can be done. You know, hearing loops are relatively easy to install, and if you get assigned a college that doesn't have hearing loops, they should be able to put them in, and that's great because then that college has them forever and future students don't have to worry about it like you did. But particularly things for students with mobility impairments, especially wheelchair users, there are some vital buildings in colleges that are just not accessible. And hopefully each college, as they kind of grow and develop and build new buildings and restore old things, will then make them accessible. It's what's happening at Trinity at the moment. The library didn't used to have really any wheelchair accessibility, not without having someone to help open doors. And the current big building project we're doing, at the end of it, that will then be accessible. And I think most colleges are doing a similar thing. But if you're applying right now, that isn't enormously helpful. So it is worth just saying, look, I know you've said you can make this place accessible for me, but what are you actually able to do in the next 3 months? And if you can't make these important places accessible, then I think we need to consider whether I should be going to another college. And, you know, it can sound like a difficult thing to say because
definitely,
everyone always thinks,
especially at that point, because and also with Oxford also, I just feel like when I was applying, there's this sort of like, oh, it's Oxford, I don't want to like change what they're doing, they have tradition and stuff like that. So and
there's kind of everyone knows about rivalry between colleges, and it's actually not as much as anyone would think. But because you hear about it before you start, you kind of think that if you say to your college, I want to go somewhere else, they would be like, well, we don't want you now, go away.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons I think actually the best people to talk to about this would probably be the Disability Advisory Service. They are part of the university rather than specific to each college, and they have a team of advisors that work with disabled students at each college. They're really good. We abbreviate them to DAS, DAS, which is slightly confusing because there is also Disabled Students Allowance, DSA. So lots of acronyms to get your head around, but once you've got it, you'll be speaking them all and your friends will be like, what's that? I don't know what that means. So yeah, they're a really good source of knowledge, and just, you know, you explain your situation, explain why you're worried. They are the people who would deal with it.
Would you go to DAS before contacting the college you've had your offer confirmed by, or which way around would you sort of do those things?
I think it would really depend what you want to do. Personally, I think I would contact the college and say, these are my needs. From my research into your college, I don't think how the buildings are at the moment meets my needs.
Okay, yeah.
Do you think realistically this can be changed before I start? And I think if you get pulled on like pre-results day, you know, on around the 10th of January, that's a really good time to do it. Don't wait till you've got your offer like confirmed if you're waiting for a
so this is when you get the conditional offer,
when you get the conditional offer,
not results day. Yeah
because, you know, it would be good to have longer and really push for it and say, look, we can't wait till my offer becomes unconditional because there's only 2 months between then and when I start. And these changes that you're making would benefit me if I do get the place, but they also make your college more accessible, so they're worth doing anyway. It's not just something that you sort of do for somebody.
It's not selfish.
Like me saying do this in January, even though I might not actually get the offer in August, is still worth doing for the college because they have a more accessible college at the end of it. So yeah, I'd ask them first, and if they say absolutely yes, it'll be fine, and also kind of say it in such a way that you're confident that they actually will, and, you know, they outline how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it, then that's great. And if after that you're a little bit concerned that it might not be ready in time, or the college just say no, we can't do that, that's when I would say go and talk to DAS and say, this is the situation. I didn't apply to college. I'm a bit worried about accessibility there. And they can either try and get the college that you have been assigned to make the changes, or have a conversation about whether it's the right college for you. And I don't really know what the system is at that point. There's no clear system, like I said, but I think there is some stuff that can be done on a case-by-case basis as it currently stands.
And it's good that DAS is there as, like, if you're worried about that at any point, that there are people there you can go to about it.
Yeah, and they're very good, and they're very good at helping people before they've actually started.
Right, yeah, that's brilliant. So I guess this is actually kind of going back a little bit to just before getting the offer. Obviously, when you have to go to Oxford for the interview process, and even with admissions tests, obviously that's a very short amount of time before, you know, applying with your UCAS application and then having to go for this interview. So in that period of time, what sort of questions can students ask about accessibility for the few days they're there for interview?
Yeah, and that's definitely a really important thing, the interview, because I think it could really put you off somewhere if you go and stay somewhere for an interview and it's really not accessible.
Definitely, yeah.
And the same for open days, actually. If you go and visit a college and it's not accessible to you, you're not really going to want to apply there. Interviews, I would say, as soon as you find out which college you're being interviewed by, which is your host college, I think they're usually called, the one where you would stay overnight. Yes. Let them know about your accommodation needs in terms of what you would need out of a bedroom. Do you need an ensuite? Do you need it to be on the ground floor? That kind of thing. And then for some subjects like medicine, you definitely have a second interview and you know what college it's at before you've even started. So, I mean, I personally knew I was going to be interviewed at both St John's and Trinity, and I contacted both and said, this is what I'm going to need. Some subjects it's not quite so clear cut, especially I think within
Oh
humanities.
gosh, yeah, it's really
Junaid
not.
and I have both worked as helpers during the admissions period, sort of
Yes.
directing people to interviews. And some of the humanities subjects, like you'll have an interview and then the next day this other college will just randomly be like, here, you have an interview too. And they might not have known until an hour beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. It's very, if any students are worried about leaving things last minute, you don't know what that's like. I think Oxford tutors, you'd be surprised how many of them have mastered that art.
Yeah, I think they meet very late in the evening afterwards and decide what they're doing.
It's a big process, yeah.
Yeah, and it makes sense because they've got a lot of students to go through.
Of course.
But I think in the case where you do a subject where you might be called for second or third interviews at another college, I would just almost remind the college that's hosting you, say, please can you pass on all of this information to any college that requests to see me for interview.
Right, yeah, okay.
And do it like that. And hopefully that will mean that the information will get to them. It might get to them a little bit later, because if they don't decide they want to interview you until the night before, they don't have as long. But realistically, there should be ways around most of the issues. Even if the interview room is up a flight of stairs and you can't do stairs, they can move it. That's not a difficult thing to do at very short notice. One of the things that is quite a common access need at interviews is some subjects have pre-reading before the interview. So you'll get like 20 or 30 minutes to read a passage, or sometimes I think it's a translation for languages. I'm not really sure. I've never done one. I've just escorted people to the room. And if you're entitled to extra time in your exams, like your GCSEs, A-levels or equivalent, then you would probably be entitled to extra time on that as well. And that's something to definitely make clear to colleges. They should prompt you about it if you have a pre-reading passage, to say, if you have extra time normally, let us know. And that's just a really basic requirement that a lot of people with a lot of different needs, even people who don't actually consider themselves disabled but just have difficulties reading things for long periods of time, difficulties in certain light conditions, get that adaptation. It's not a big deal. I mean, we've managed it as helpers before. You just take someone up, you know, a very specific number of minutes early. It'll be like, this person gets 3.5 extra minutes. So that's quite easy. Something that's a little bit more difficult is if you need those passages in a different format. If you need them in large print, if you need them on a computer, if you need them in Braille. Braille particularly because most colleges, or I don't think any college, has its own Braille printing embossing ability. So they would probably need to know in advance, but that's fine because you could say to them, I need to know in advance. And if you need it on a computer, you'd probably take your own computer because it's set up for you, and they would email it to you at the time, so you didn't have it in advance. The same for within interviews. You're often shown something, and if it would be better for you to access that on your own computer, then as long as you say in advance to the college hosting you, I'm not going to be able to read something if they put it in front of me on paper, they'll find a way around that. And I've seen that work well in the past. So it's very much just a case of getting in touch as early as possible, as soon as you know where you're going, and saying, this is what I need. I can't do it this way. So here's your job to fix it, basically. And the same applies for admissions testing, although it's a little bit scarier because you don't ever go and meet a person, and you don't get to go and sit in a room full of nice, helpful students. I hope we're nice and helpful. We try to be nice and helpful. But particularly, you know, you can get extra time on admissions testing if you're entitled to extra time normally. And if you need it in an alternative format, you just have to contact the board that's doing the exam and try and get them to provide it in an alternative format. Most of them will have experience with providing alternative formats. Some less so. I mean, medicine is quite an unusual thing to go into if you're visually impaired. So some of the admissions testing that I had to do, they just said, we can't do it. And you get an exemption, which means you get like an average grade on the admissions test. And this wasn't actually for my Oxford ones, it was for other medical schools. But I didn't want an exemption. I was very cross because an exemption gives you an average grade, and I knew that I could do better than average in that test. I got very, very cross and wrote some angry emails. And now they provide that same test in 3 different font sizes on 3 different colours. So
like as a standard?
as standard.
This is the UCAT we're talking about.
Yeah, what's now called UCAT.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Any visually impaired medical students, future
There we
medical
go.
students
Wow.
because most people will do both UCAT and BMAT.
Yes. I'm sure we'll have episodes talking about this at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are visually impaired and wanting to do UCAT, it should be okay. BMAT
but let Tiri know if it's not. She'll have a word.
Yeah, but if it's not, I'll send some more emails. Do you remember me from 4 years ago? I was very cross.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you can also, like, there's no shame in taking the exemption. If you're offered an exemption and you think that's better for you, then take it. You know, it's offered for a reason. And sometimes it's not because the test is inaccessible in its format. It might be that the type of thing it's testing is not suitable for you. For instance, some of the spatial orientation testing that we had to do, I know some dyspraxic students would really, really struggle with, and they would score low if they took it just because of the nature of their disability, meaning that that is not an acceptable way of testing them. So if you're offered an exemption and it's suitable for you to take it, definitely take it. I have a personal history with getting cross at people offering me exemptions, but there have been times when it's been appropriate for me to take an exemption, and I have done that.
Yeah. Have you got anything else you'd want to mention about applying before we talk about being at Oxford and life after that point?
The only thing I would say, I mean, kind of the bit between, after you've applied, after you've got your offer, I kind of touched on it when we were talking about accommodation and college choice, but also for things like access to learning and what your faculty need to provide for you, get in touch with everyone who seems relevant as soon as possible. Do it in January, even if you've got a conditional offer, assuming that you will get your unconditional offer in August, because there often isn't as much time between August and October to get things done. And yeah, it's really important to let people know what needs to happen as soon as possible. Even if they say, oh, we'll start thinking about this in a few months, you've let them know, you've said, this is what I think I'm going to need. I came and visited Oxford quite a few times between January and when I started in October, and met with various people. Again, at the moment, how possible that's going to be, you know, is a bit unknown, but, you know, people should be able to have Zoom meetings with you and exchange emails with you, and you may be able to come and visit, depending on sort of the state of the pandemic. It's all a bit unknown at the moment, but the main point really is get in touch with disability advisors at college, disability advisors at faculty, and the Disability Advisory Service centrally. Faculty being the department where you're studying, faculty like for medicine, So both important to have both the college and the department. Yeah, and especially for subjects where you spend a lot of time in your department, which is usually more towards the science subjects, it's more important to do that kind of thing. Yes, definitely. So moving on now to talking about, after all of this stuff, there's still more to talk about, but after all this stuff, you get to Oxford. I think the first thing that we could talk about, you did mention it earlier, the Disabled Students Allowance. What is it? How does it work? Those are the questions. It's a really good crossover actually between like application and when you're at Oxford, because the Disabled Students Allowance is basically funding given by the UK government. I think it might be slightly regionalised with Wales and Scotland, but I think it's essentially the same. And if you are a UK student, you can apply for equipment or non-medical helpers, which I'll talk about in a minute, or general allowance, which is usually for things like taxis, to essentially help you with your degree with respect to your disability. And that is funded by Disabled Students Allowance, which is funded by the government. It's kind of like an add-on to student finance, and you actually get prompted to apply for it when you apply for a maintenance loan. Okay, right. There's a thing saying, do you want to apply for it? And it may link you to the website, or it might send you an email saying, try applying. And a lot of people don't apply for it because they think, oh, my disability is not bad enough. Or I've heard people say like, oh, well, all I have is dyslexia. Or, oh, well, all I have is like a mental health condition. And I don't consider it a disability. And I mean, now's probably a really good time to like define disability. And people who have dyslexia or people with mental health conditions, under what is considered disability, it does count.
Right.
From a
Yeah.
personal identity perspective, if you choose not to define yourself as disabled with anything, there's actually a population of deaf people who choose not to define themselves as disabled. They view their deafness more as a culture, and that's totally fine. And I have no problem with people saying, actually, although I have a condition that classes as disabled, I don't personally choose to identify as disabled. But even if you don't, you can still access the support. If you can get over the fact that you will have something that has disabled in the name attached to you, the support is still there for you. And it doesn't matter how small or big the thing that you have is, the support's there. And if you don't apply for it, you'll never know if you're eligible.
Yeah.
So you essentially fill out a lot of long forms, and again, as I'm sure much of the disabled community will know, there's a lot of long forms. This one is not as bad as like disability living allowance. It's not that bad.
Oh, okay. Right.
For a government form, it could be worse.
Oh, right.
But you need, the classic stuff, letters from doctors. I think you need something from an educational psychologist if it's a specific learning difficulty, that kind of thing. The classic kind of please prove you're disabled type documents. And then you get assessed by a person whose job is to assess people for Disabled Students Allowance. Normally that happens in person. The next few years may happen more of them online, but actually I think it's a thing that they are trying to get back to happening in person because it's quite important actually. And you can go in and say, I think I need X, Y, and Z. And they can say, well, I think actually you'd also benefit from A, B, and C. And you kind of just have a conversation with them, and then they write a long report, which is a recommendation to Disabled Students Allowance, who usually then just agree to fund everything. Occasionally there's quibbles and it goes backward and forward.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Normally they decide to fund everything. And there is this complicated bit in the middle where the assessor has to give 3 quotes or something for every single bit of equipment, and they'll all be different. And Disabled Students Allowance will then pick usually the cheapest, but occasionally not the cheapest.
Okay.
No one really knows why. I think maybe if they can get all the equipment from one place, it might make it cheaper overall or something like that. But you don't really need to know about that. You'll get a letter with like loads of quotes on, and then you'll get one letter from DSA saying you are entitled to this stuff. And it's broadly split into these 3 groups. So you've got equipment, which is pretty much anything you can physically hold and doesn't require an additional person. So you can get a laptop. DSA has a sort of rule where you pay £200 towards a laptop, because all university students will probably need a laptop, even if they're not disabled. But disabled students might need a better quality laptop because they might be running software that uses up a lot of storage. I don't really know enough about computers to say that properly. So you pay an amount for sort of a normal standard laptop and they pay the rest. You can also get dictaphones to record in lectures or record other classes and things like that. You probably have to get, I know in Oxford you have to get permission from the university to record, but that's given out by Disability Advisory Service. You just sign a form saying, I promise I won't share these on the internet.
Okay, right.
And you are then allowed to record in lectures, and you shouldn't have to, ask a lecture every single time you're recording, because you're kind of exempt from the having to do that.
Yeah.
The Advisory Service have just gone in and said you are allowed to record when you want to record in lectures. So dictaphones are often given out. I got a fancy kind of electric magnifier on a stand, which was very cool. It's like a tablet with a camera. Some people might get like add-on adaptations to their hearing aids that they can like leave at the front for the lecturer to wear, or to leave to attach to a system in a lab to hear what's on the tannoy.
Oh, okay.
So they're quite cool.
Yeah, that is quite cool.
Some people might get things that help them live kind of independently once they've moved off to university. There is a kind of line drawn that it has to be stuff that's helping with your education and not helping with your like healthcare or general care.
Right.
So I don't think you would get like, I don't know, something to help you in the bathroom. I could be wrong about this, but I don't think you get that kind of thing. I think that's meant to be provided by like social and healthcare.
Yeah.
But for instance, I got a really fancy desk chair that's really good for my back and holds everything like in the right place and stops me having bad posture. And that helps me because you sit in a desk chair while you're working.
Yeah. So it's not like strictly like only stuff that you would use in a lecture or in a lab.
But it has
it's
to
a
be
little
broadly
bit, yeah.
related to
Yeah.
studying, I think
Okay,
is the
cool.
point. And, you know, I got a really bright light, and a lot of people get printers because if you don't have to walk back and forward to wherever the printer is in your uni, that's great.
Yeah.
And although we do get free printing at Trinity, you don't get free printing everywhere. Even in other universities, you often don't get free printing. But if you need to print things more because of your disability, especially I know visually impaired people, if you're printing things in large print, that can be 5 times as much paper as anyone else.
Yep.
So having your own printer is a very cost-effective way of
Definitely.
handling that. So that's kind of equipment. And there's a cap of about, I think it's like £7,000. It changes a bit every year on the maximum amount that they'll give you. And you get it once at the beginning of your degree if you apply for disabled students before you start, and that should last you the whole way through. Then there's the non-medical helpers. So these are usually, so you can have interpreters. If you're a British Sign Language user, you'd have a BSL interpreter who'd go to lectures with you and go to tutorials. So that counts as non-medical help. Some people have note takers who sit with them in a lecture, or maybe not even with them, on the other side of the lecture theatre, and they take notes for you and you can read up those notes later. That's really useful for people who struggle to both listen to a lecture and take notes at the same time.
Yeah.
Or struggle to take notes fast enough. Someone else is taking notes for you. And that's a really good system. There's other slightly rarer types of non-medical helpers. You can get special support providers who are basically people who know a lot about your specific disability and will meet with you maybe once a week to just chat through how you're doing and maybe discuss studying techniques that are adapted for your disability. But your DSA assessor should go through all these options and say, oh, I think you'd benefit from that. I don't think you would. And you can say, actually, I don't want that, or actually, I think that would be good for me, and here's why.
Yeah.
And they're usually very receptive to hearing what you think, because, you know, you've done GCSEs, you've done A-levels, you got to this point, you must know what works for you.
What works and what doesn't, yeah.
Yeah. And then you can, there's sort of mentoring for, in Oxford, we have a really good system for mentoring for students with particular needs. In particular, I know it's used by a lot of autistic students, and you just meet with your mentor, and it's not counselling, it's kind of like the special support provider that I spoke about. You discuss how you're feeling about your studies, how you're feeling generally, and they can, you know, help you out with just how to manage university life, really. So there's lots of different things. You apply for that. The funding cap is obviously much higher because you're paying someone's salary, but that all gets decided in advance. You don't really have to worry about it. You often have to fill out timesheets to say when they were with you. That's a bit of extra admin, but other than that, it's a relatively simple system. And then the final group is called a general allowance, and it's basically anything that's a continued cost that you can't pay all at once at the beginning, but isn't about a non-medical helper. And that's usually taxis. So you can be entitled to taxis, and there will be a pre-agreement which like locations you can go to and from with the taxi. So you probably can't go to a bar in a taxi, but you can
right.
to your lecture theatre from your college. And you can also get like ink and paper for printing and that kind of thing. So it's altogether you can cover most things.
There's a lot of things. Yeah, I wasn't aware how many things were covered under it, actually.
Yeah, and some people will apply for DSA and the only thing they will have is a note taker, and that's it. And some people will have almost everything that could be offered.
Yeah, it is a lot.
It's fine. Apply, see what you think would help you, see what the assessor thinks would help you, and go for it. And it's not like a loan. You don't have to repay the money in the same way that you have to repay.
Yeah.
Sadly, this does not apply to international students. It's a UK government system, much like maintenance loans, and there really isn't a great alternative. And I don't have much to say on that other than it's just a bit rubbish.
Yeah.
you know, the university can try and help out and support you as best as possible, but without this big pot of funding that you get when you have DSA, they are slightly limited in what they can do. So yeah, it's a bit of a difficult one, and I never really like talking about it because there's no solution.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of everything on what DSA is. Apply as soon as possible. You can apply as soon as you've got your offers. You don't need to wait till they're unconditional. It can be a bit difficult. Once you get this letter saying you're entitled to this and this, no one really explains when you're meant to apply for the stuff. And it's usually...
so you get told you're entitled to it,
yeah,
and then you have to...
But that could be in like June.
Oh, okay, right.
But you have to then order the stuff from the company. You kind of have a number that you phone and a quote, and they've been sent what you're entitled to. And you say, hello, I'd like to order it, and they arrange delivery. And it's kind of up to you. If you want equipment, for instance, to be delivered to your house a month before you start university, so you get used to it, cool. If you don't want it till you get to university, also fine. But you probably want to get in touch with the company as soon as possible and just work out timescales. Once you order, how long is it going to be? So you can then know when to order. And with the non-medical helpers, especially things like interpreters and note takers, definitely get in touch as soon as possible, explain the subject you're doing, where you are, because they do have to find somebody who knows a bit about your subject, especially in science subjects, because someone who's taking notes in a science lecture, they're using loads of words that you, like most of the population, don't know, so they have to have some understanding. And the same for interpreters, there are words that are kind of very science specific that most people won't know. So it's really good to get in touch as soon as possible. And there can be problems where a company that provides note takers will say, oh yeah, we've got someone, it's fine. And then just before you start, they'll be like, oh, sorry, we don't have anyone anymore. And then you have to find another company, and you end up having no note taker for a week or 2 weeks or ages. So definitely get in touch as soon as possible and kind of badger them, like not rudely, but just email them very regularly to remind them that you exist and that you will need that support, and this is when, and have they got a definite start date, have they got a definite person. And yeah, just it's one of those things you have to be quite on top of, otherwise it can escape you.
So that you recommend doing that as soon as you've got your conditional offer?
Well, as soon as
applying for it.
Offer, apply for DSA.
Yeah.
And then that takes a few months to do the whole thing. And once you get your letter, it's called an entitlement letter, and it just tells you what you're entitled to and which companies will be providing it. Contact the companies who've been assigned to provide you, particularly the non-medical help side of things, and say, this is when I'm starting, this is what subject I'm doing, this is where I am in the world. And I know you might not know now 6 months in advance who will be providing the support, but can you guarantee me that you'll be able to provide somebody?
Yeah.
And what will we do if you don't have anyone at the last minute? Sort of try and preempt the problems before they start, and hopefully they'll not happen at all, and you won't have to deal with any of the issues. But it does happen sometimes.
Is any of everything we've discussed so far different? I mean, everything's different now, and everything's different this year because of the pandemic. But do we know anything about how to apply this year given COVID-19, or if there's any specific differences to keep in mind at the moment?
In terms of application, it should be pretty much the same, with the possible exception that your actual needs assessment would take place via video or on the phone or something like that. But I think that will really depend on the individual provider, and you just get in touch with your local DSA provider and they will let you know what they're doing. There are more differences actually for people who already have DSA and are either starting university this year or returning to university this year. Most companies that provide non-medical helpers have said that they won't be providing any face-to-face support, which does make sense.
Yeah.
But it's obviously a bit difficult. I mean, if lectures are online, it's okay because both the note taker and the student can have access to the online lectures, and the note taker just takes notes and sends them to the student, and it's not that different to how it works normally. I think for interpreters it would be more challenging because you need to set up some kind of like three-way video link where the student can watch the lecture and also the interpreter, and the interpreter can also watch the student and the lecturer, so it's a bit difficult. And there are other things you can get as non-medical helpers. You can get training with any new technology you're given. And if that's having to happen over the phone, that might be more challenging. But that mostly applies to people who are sort of either starting this year or already at university. Hopefully by next year things will have settled down a bit, but who knows? We can't see the future. But yeah, there is a lot of uncertainty about how non-medical helpers will work, given that they're not really meant to be in the same place. So it's all a bit at the moment.
Yeah. Is there anything else we wanted to mention about DSA before we move on, or I guess anything generally about like
one more thing on
student
DSA?
life?
Yeah, one more thing on DSA, I guess, is that you might start university and not have a disability, or not think that what you have is significant, and then either your health changes or your disability changes, or the pressures of university mean that it's a more significant problem than you thought, and you can apply to DSA whilst you're in university. And the best way to do that is to contact the Disability Advisory Service, DAS, not DSA, and say, look, I think I need to apply for DSA. Can you support me with that? And they can do that. And they can also put in place a student support plan, which is kind of like an outline of your needs that then, with your permission, can be sent to your tutors and your lecturers and people in your department. Those also get produced for anyone who applies with DSA. And it's something that happens automatically, essentially. If you apply and you get DSA, you then get in touch with the Disability Advisory Service and say, hello, I'm a disabled student.
Yeah.
And they will put together with you a kind of detailed list of what lecturers and tutors need to do to accommodate you and what your college needs to do to accommodate you. But you can get one of those at any time. You don't have to think, oh, I didn't do it at the beginning, so I can't do it now. You can contact Disability Advisory Service in your third year if it suddenly becomes a problem in your third year, and you can apply for Disabled Students Allowance then. I wouldn't advise doing it if you can do it earlier, because it's quite a stressful thing to manage in the middle of an Oxford term.
Yes, of course.
It's definitely better to get done in advance if you think that you might need it. But if something comes totally out of the blue, and it does happen, people can just develop a disability at any time. And if that happens in the middle of your sort of university life, don't think that you've missed the boat in terms of support.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So now moving on to potentially some more fun stuff. Maybe we'll see. DisCam. You mentioned at the start. Obviously, you are the chairperson, and you talked a bit about what DisCam is and what they do. I understand from you that they have sort of social side, which you tell me is very active, and then also the campaigning side. So just tell us a bit more about DisCam and all the sort of stuff that goes on.
Okay. So DisCam is one of the campaigns that's within Oxford SU. So I'll just briefly explain what Oxford SU is.
Yeah, that's good actually.
So it's across the whole university, not college by college, but it's a student union. It's not sort of university staff. It's a bit of a subtle distinction, but you often hear other universities talking about their SU, and it's essentially a sort of more student-led group of people focusing on the student experience, but there will still also be paid staff, many of whom will be ex-students. It's kind of almost, in my opinion, a bridge between the student population and the university scary, incredibly clever professor people.
Yeah.
They're not scary in themselves, but scary in the knowledge.
Concept, their existence.
And position of power. So most universities have an SU, and Oxford also has one. The system that we have at Oxford with all the colleges, each college, there are usually common rooms. There's the JCR, the Junior Common Room, which is undergraduates. So Trinity JCR, Junaid and I are in. And that's also kind of like a mini SU. It's like, it could be called the Trinity Student Union. It functions in a similar way. But Oxford SU is like the big overarching one with more, we have paid staff, we have money, we have, we can reach across the whole university. So there are a bunch of campaigns representing essentially minority groups. So there's CRAE, which is the Campaign for Racial Awareness and Equality. There's LGBTQ plus CAM, so cam is campaign. There is DisCam, which is for suspended students. So that's students who choose to take a year out in the middle of their degree. International Students Campaign. There's loads, and it's really great. So we're the Disabled Students Campaign. And yeah, so we do a lot of social stuff for disabled students. A lot of disabled students can find themselves quite socially isolated, either because of just practical reasons relating to their disability, the struggle to go out and meet people. They don't enjoy doing a lot of the things that other students do, or it's not accessible to them. So we try and provide a kind of alternative type of event that people can come to that's safe and adjusted for people's needs. So we have run events in the past like Braille Scrabble nights. And anyone can play Braille Scrabble because it's also written down. You don't need to know Braille.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. We also have a Braille Uno set, which is similar in that it looks like normal Uno cards, but there's also Braille on them. So everyone can play together. We've done arts and crafts type things. We had a really successful kind of recurring art event, which I'm hoping to restart at some point. And we'll do socials that are kind of like an equivalent of going to a bar, except all the lights are on, there's no loud music, and there's no allergens in the food, and there's no alcohol. So that covers a lot of the things that people worry about when they go out. Sometimes not even just disabled people. Some people don't like alcohol. Some people are really allergic to things, but we try and make it so it's as accessible for everyone as possible. We host it in a place that's got a disabled toilet. We host it in a place that has level access and, you know, has a hearing loop, and just try and do our best to make sure it's as accessible for everyone as possible. And we'd like for also non-disabled people to come, as long as they kind of respect the rules surrounding that, because it's just nice for people to get together. But we found it's a useful place for disabled students to get together and meet other disabled students and just kind of have a bit of a chilled out time. The other main social thing we do is online. So we run a series of very successful Facebook groups where so we have a main group, which is called the Oxford SU Disabilities Campaign Community Group. And that's for any disabled student at Oxford to join, and people post in there, and we advertise our events there. People will advertise other things going on in Oxford to do with disability. Sometimes there'll be a play that's including topics on disability, or sometimes there'll be an event that we haven't organised that's about disability. People post in there. You know, other things, if people will like say, oh, I saw this was being put on a sales page, and it's like a useful disability aid that someone's selling. It's like, oh, I wonder if anyone wants this.
Yeah.
And then also just general advice, you know, has anyone spoken to this tutor about this problem? Has anyone ever experienced this before? And that's got, I think, like nearly 1,000 people in. It's it's big. And then we have lots of smaller groups, which we call them the condition-specific support groups. So they're for particular disabilities or conditions. And it's a slightly more anonymous space, I guess, just because there are fewer people. And in all of these groups, you can post, or you can also post anonymously. We have a Google Form system, so you can post anonymously.
Okay, nice, yeah.
And that's more often used in the condition-specific support groups.
Yeah.
I think because often the things that are being discussed are maybe a little bit more difficult, or things that people wouldn't want a friend who might happen to be in the group to see. So that's used quite commonly. So one of the groups that's most used of those condition-specific support groups is the depression and anxiety group. So it's definitely a group that there are a lot of students who have those conditions at Oxford. We're not kind of gatekeeping in any way. We don't require that you like prove that you're diagnosed. If you don't have to be officially diagnosed, if you think that this is a problem that you have and could benefit from speaking to other people about it, that's fine. You have to be that, and you have to be a student at Oxford or an ex-student. That's basically the requirement. And we do ask people to answer a question, just basically saying, I'm a student doing this subject at this college, before we accept them into the group, just kind of to prove that they're not a random bot account or
basically. Yeah,
but we're not asking for like details on disability or anything like that. So that's a big group. We have some groups that are less used, like the blindness and visual impairment group has about 5 people in and is not massively used, mostly because it's just a much less high incidence disability.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the rates of disabilities among children, and most people who go to university will have had their disability at some point throughout childhood, visual impairment is, I think, the third lowest incidence disability. The only lower ones being acquired brain injuries, and deafblindness is the lowest. So some of these groups are quite small and people are hesitant to join them because they don't want to be, one of less than 10 people. But I always say join them even if you never post, because eventually they'll get big enough. And that's what happened with all of the groups.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and we've tried to kind of group medical conditions so it's not too specific. We have one for autoimmune conditions generally, which would include sort of all type 1 diabetics, rheumatoid arthritis, all of these kind of conditions. We have a cancer support group that was set up recently in conjunction with a student at Oxford who has cancer, because that was a gap that we've missed out. So we really do appreciate someone coming in and saying, actually, I want a group for this.
Yeah.
And we'd be really happy to kind of use our platform to help them set it up. And in the light of coronavirus, we've also set up a new type of group. It's not condition specific, but it's for anyone who's worried about social distancing and coronavirus in relation to their disability. So
Okay. Yeah.
either people who are kind of clinically vulnerable and are really worried about catching coronavirus and are worried about returning to university, people who might have to return to university and shield, people who might have to stay at home and shield, that kind of thing. And then the other group is people who struggle with aspects of social distancing because of their disability. So people who struggle to wear masks, including lots of people with different sensory processing disorders, autism, anxiety, a lot of deaf or hard of hearing people who, if other people wear a mask, they can't lip read. A lot of visually impaired people who can't social distance because they can't see how far 2 meters is, or personally, these perspex barriers that are going up to stop people going certain ways. Yep. I have had many a collision with, and I'm going to start producing my own large stickers saying barrier here and just sticking them on stuff in public.
Yeah, that would work.
And so many incidences. So yeah, that's a new group, and hope that's kind of kicked off and people have started joining. I think that's just kind of us adjusting to what life is now like, and hopefully, trying to help people out, because there's lots of changes for everyone who's returning to or starting at university.
Definitely. But it's good to hear that you've got such an active online platform as well. Especially at the moment, it's going to be, I'm sure it's even more useful. It
was really useful last term when everyone was not in the university, because we did Trinity remotely. And yeah, lots of people were using it then. We saw a massive rise in the use of the Facebook groups. Yeah. We also actually have a Facebook page, which is the thing that posts on all the groups and is the admin of all the groups. So remember to like that if you join the groups, because that's where we also post events and things. And we just share useful stuff, like sometimes Oxford University Sport, they did a load of home workout videos during lockdown, and some of them they did adapted for wheelchair users, so we would share those. Adapted workouts, or things going on at other universities that you can join in with, that kind of stuff. So the page is good, if I do say so myself. And then we have a Twitter and an Instagram, and we also have sort of a section on the SU website, which you can buy a membership for, and I say this with inverted commas because it's free, but you have to like add it to your basket like you're shopping, and then
with the SU website, with
the SU website,
it's just designed that way.
And it just means that you are on our mailing list and we can email you. We don't email very often, but for things like, here's an event, let's remind you all it's happening, or if we're recruiting for new committee members, we'll send the odd email out. So that's kind of how you can stay in touch with us. I think we're hoping at some point in the future to start looking at branching out to YouTube and doing some YouTube videos.
Cool.
So we will see, but we'll obviously advertise that across the other platforms. So if you keep up to date with our Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, then you'll definitely hear about it.
The current prospective students can look at the Facebook, Instagram and Twitter because they're public pages, I assume. Yeah.
They're all public pages. And if you want to message on any of those accounts, absolutely fine. We will try and answer your questions. Sometimes we get questions about like admissions and things, and because we're a student campaign, like we can't usually answer that, but at the very least I can forward you to someone who can. So a lot of the time I get emails that actually I can't do anything about, but I do know who they should be for, and I can kind of funnel information in that way.
That's really cool. Like that's an actual sort of route of communication you can have to current disabled students who are at Oxford now.
Yeah, and I mean, I can also forward people to actual disabled students. If someone says, oh, I'm a type 1 diabetic wanting to do this course, I'd really like to talk to somebody else in a similar position.
Oh, right, like specifically, yeah.
I can say, okay, well, I'll put out a call and see if there's anyone who'd be willing to chat to you. And I can just post in one of the groups.
That's so cool. That's great.
And I can't guarantee someone will get back, but it's a way to do that. And also, we're really happy to have particularly offer holders, but also prospective students who are seriously thinking about Oxford joining the groups to ask questions, especially the community group.
Okay, yeah.
I think that the condition-specific groups we monitor a little bit more closely. Like, we don't allow advertising in them or event posting. It's very much a support group. But the community groups, if you are a prospective student and you want to ask a general question, you can join. You can use the anonymous function to do that as well. Like, we're really happy to have you and try and answer any questions. And I always start advertising the community group as soon as offers are given out, because I think, I found it really useful. I joined before I started and managed to answer a lot of questions by asking other disabled students. So I really am quite proud of the Facebook stuff, even though it all predated me and I haven't really done anything. But
it sounds great. It sounds like a very thriving platform. And especially, like you say, if prospective students can access it too, then that's even better. Yeah,
and it should be sort of as accessible as possible. Obviously, we're limited by Facebook, but we use alt text and image descriptions. One of the reasons I haven't thought too heavily about YouTube yet is I just don't have the time to commit to making it perfectly accessible. And
yeah, we're on that now as well. Yeah, with our podcast.
for DisCam, I don't want to produce content that isn't accessible.
Of course, yeah.
And at the moment, I can achieve the same stuff using Facebook. So on our page, we have the groups tab at the side, which lists all of the groups. We also have the Our Story section, which is not really our story. It's just a useful set of links to all of the subgroups. And then we have our committee, who are wonderful. I'm very proud of my wonderful committee. We are almost full in terms of sort of committee positions. We have a load of intersectional officers. So we have women's officers, so they sit on the women's campaign as disability officers and on the disability campaign as women's officers.
Okay, right.
Really cool system.
So linking up the different campaigns of the SU. Yeah.
And we have the same for LGBTQ+, we have the same for the suspended students, the same for international students, the same for BME students, and they link to CRAE. I think I must have missed one. But yeah, so we have them for everyone. And then we have a secretary, currently lacking a treasurer, so if you're interested, let me know. And we have a mental health officer. We have a college reps officer, which is a really important job, because ideally every college common room, JCRs, MCRs, should have a disabilities officer. And if they don't, they should have, at the very least, an equalities officer who kind of oversees all of them.
Yeah.
And we like to get those people together once a term and chat about issues everyone's having at college, see if there are any common things going on, and also see if we can host events. We've had ideas about hosting cross-college disability events between different disabled students officers in the past. So our college reps officer kind of coordinates all of the disabled students officers, tries to make sure the list is updated, which is very difficult because JCRs and MCRs do their own elections at random points in the year, so knowing when it's being changed is a nightmare. So that's a very admin heavy job. We have campaigns and advocacy officers. So we have two, and they're kind of like my right hand people. They're really good. And actually kind of doing a lot of the work where I've kind of identified as something we need to do, but I don't have time to do it. And yeah, absolutely brilliant. My whole committee.
Shout out to the whole team.
Yeah, socials and events officers, organising socials and things. We are lacking a communications officer, so that's another thing. So we run our.
You're listening to this right now. There's 2 open roles for you.
Yeah. I think there's a third one actually. There was definitely another one. Oh, class reps. Yes, that's the one I forgot because we don't have one. There's Class Act, which is one of the campaigns, which is representing students from different social backgrounds, like low income, comprehensive state secondaries. And we currently don't have an intersectional class disabilities rep. So that's the third one. We run our main elections every Hillary term. That's the term just after Christmas, when the SU do all of the elections. But we run by-elections once a term to fill any empty spaces. So if you're watching this and starting in Michaelmas 2020, is that where we are?
Yes, that's right.
Michaelmas 2020.
Get involved.
Get involved. It's I'm very proud of everyone involved with DisCam, and I mean, I took over from somebody who was absolutely brilliant and had been involved in the campaign for a really long time, and big shoes to fill, but I hope I'm doing okay.
Well, it sounds like there's a super vibrant community, not only in the university, but also in DisCam itself, with all these sort of people doing all these roles and working together. And it's really cool. I'm really happy that that's there, and that you're doing such important work. We have talked about all sorts of stuff. This has been a long episode, actually, I've just noticed. Which is good. No, not at all. No, it's good. We've talked about all sorts of stuff, from applying to being at Oxford and DisCam. So just to finish off, with the campaign side of DisCam, just mostly because I'm curious, but also it would just be nice to know, what's DisCam's next steps in terms of campaigning for accessibility at Oxford University? What are the main things coming up that DisCam's working on?
So at the moment, we're actually kind of coming to the end of a lot of things where we've been planning them for a long time and they've been kind of on the radar, but we're finally able to solidify them. So one thing is our accessible bathrooms project that started before I was chair, and was basically to produce some materials that could be distributed within the university that would explain to people not to tie up the red cords in accessible bathrooms, because often they're tied up away from the floor because they get in the way of people, but actually they become useless. If you fall over in a toilet and you can't reach the cord, then you could be stuck there, and it's really dangerous. So we've produced these little cards that explain why not to do that, and they kind of attach to the cords. And also a poster to go in near accessible bathrooms, explaining that not everyone who uses an accessible bathroom is visibly disabled. Not everyone who uses one is a wheelchair user. Some people need an accessible bathroom because they have sort of medical conditions requiring them to not queue. Some people, people have assistance dogs who don't fit in normal cubicles very well. People with mobility impairments that would struggle to go upstairs to the other toilets. There's so many reasons. So we just explain, basically, don't judge someone just because they look non-disabled to you for using an accessible toilet. So those are being printed as we speak, and hoping that we can start distributing them soon. So if anyone's watching this and wants them for their college and hasn't seen them yet, let me know and we can distribute them.
Another thing Tiri will chase up angrily.
Yes. We also, we've been campaigning for a very long time to have lecture capture, so recorded lectures, which is, I think, really useful for everyone, but especially for disabled students, partly because you might struggle to actually understand things in the lecture at the speed it's going, or if you have a sensory impairment, then you're missing half of the stuff at a time and trying to catch up is difficult. Also, if people with health conditions that mean their attendance is low, they can't actually get to the lectures. Recorded lectures are just amazing and we should have them. And because of coronavirus, suddenly everyone's recording lectures because there's no other option. And it's really great. There is definitely a feeling in the whole sort of disabled community around the country and probably around the world that we've been asking for this for years. And as soon as all the non-disabled people need it, now it's happened. And there's a little bit of, I don't know if spite is the right word, but just slightly irritated. But we need to kind of take this and run with it. So we're going to be trying really hard to make sure that even as things start to go back to normal in terms of coronavirus and having lectures in person, that we don't lose this progress. And we've now shown, or it has been shown, that lecture capture is possible. It was done. It was done for a term. It was done quite well.
It's done quickly.
So that's continuing, and the Disability Advisory Service have also been very sort of strongly in favour of having lecture capture for a long time, and hopefully we're going to be working with them as much as possible to make sure that stays, and also working with them to try and make sure that any of the social distancing coronavirus related changes in the university aren't going to adversely affect disabled students. That's something that's a really important thing right now, and sort of supersedes everything else, because we need to make sure that deaf students are still able to understand their tutors, but also that students aren't put at any additional risk because everyone needs to be wearing masks, and there's a lot of conflicting access needs and we need to work a way around them, essentially. So yeah, we're working with the Disability Advisory Service and other people. I'm in contact with a few equivalent people like me at other universities. Good to see what they're doing.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll also run a few socials, albeit possibly via Zoom or socially distanced in a park.
Yeah. But as we've said, you know, you've already had the whole online platform, online meeting thing down. So I think if anyone knows how to do it, it's probably DisCam.
Yeah, I've said this a lot in the last few months, actually. Aside from students in university, disabled people were much better set up for for going into lockdown, because, you know, we're often quite good at managing changing situations, suddenly something not working. We've been using technology for a long time. Everyone started stealing our Tesco delivery slots. We were very cross.
Yeah.
But, you know, we were quite well set up for it. And I think in some ways it was an interesting experience for non-disabled people, because in some ways lockdown actually sort of simulated what it's like to be a disabled person for some specific disabilities, particularly those that sort of mean it's difficult for you to leave the house, mean that you can't go to places. And I think people should think about that and kind of recognize that for some people that's actually their life all the time, and that's not going to change unless we make the world more accessible,
which is the goal. Making the world more accessible.
At the moment, I only really focus on the university, but
university,
I can work on the world later.
Yeah. It's there. It's on the to-do list.
It's on the to-do list. University, Oxford, the city, world.
World third, yeah. So we have talked about a lot of stuff, like I said. Thank you very much, Tiri, for being on the show. I think it's been a super productive discussion, as it has been long, because we've included a lot of information about all sorts of stuff. But my hope is, and was my intention in making this episode and approaching Tiri about it, that any prospective disabled students listening to this feels like they have, I mean, not 100, you can never have 100% of the information, I guess, but feels a lot more confident in and comfortable in applying to Oxford, in that they know a little bit more about what it's like in applying, what sort of things they need to look out for, and what life actually would be like once you get to Oxford as well, and what the disabled students community is like at Oxford. And also, I hope you do know a few contacts, like Jay mentioned, with the Facebook page for DisCam that you could go to if you would like to talk more about this sort of stuff. So that is my hope, and I do hope that anyone listening or watching has got that from this episode. I think it's been amazing, and thank you very much, Tiri, for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, I'll give you lots of links you can put in the description.
The links
they will be down below.
YouTube description. Check them out. That's where the links will be. But aside from that, thank you very much to everyone listening and watching for supporting our show. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Instagram at Oxford from the Inside, and Facebook, Oxford from the Inside, and also Twitter now. We have a Twitter that is Oxford from the Inside. I think the @ is @OffT Podcast. But basically a lot of social media, so do check that out for updates on our content. I have been your host, Junaid. Tiri has been Tiri. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.